Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mythic Dungeon International. Last week, we saw the best that the Western region had to offer, and now it's time to see the East. Today, we'll be seeing the best of the Asia-Pacific, Korea, Taiwan, and Chinese regions squaring off in Dungeon Race. My name is Jack, and joining me here on the desk today is Sloot, Nagura, and Sours here. In order for teams to qualify for the top 8, they first had to go through the time trials. 3 different dungeons with unique sets of affixes that they had to be able to complete, and the accumulated times would determine their placement in the top 8 bracket here. We see Battle for Champion with a significant lead here, much closer, Sours, than we've seen out of the Western region.
Yeah, last week in the West, the top 3 teams were extremely close to each other. There was only 14 seconds between the first and third place team, and there was, I believe, like even less than 5 minutes between first and 8th place. But the East region is a completely different story. Look, what is this? 10 minutes 40 seconds between first and 8th, and Skyline even had the 11th fastest time in one of their dungeons in the time trial. So they were able to scrape by into the top 8 just barely out of this crazy region.
And we've even seen, a greater representation out of China here throughout this broadcast here, where we usually were seeing, Nagura, a lot of APAC teams really being highly represented in the highest levels, but right now China seems to be pretty dominant throughout this bracket.
Yeah, so Free Marcy not represented at all. They didn't make it into the cup. So we see 6 Chinese teams actually, which is going to be pretty interesting because from last MDI, we actually saw the Chinese teams pulling out some interesting comms like 4 damage dealers, no healer. So interesting to see what they're going to pull out here. Always
our favorite there to butt out of any of the healers here, but taking a look at the bracket as well to see where these teams start squaring up here. We have Battle for Champion and Skyline D. Battle for Champion, of course, taking that first seed bracket, and we've seen Skyline D previously in the MDI, but this Skyline here has just 1 returning player that we've seen previously here, Sloot.
Actually, Sours was very desperate to talk about this on the desk, so go ahead.
Yeah, there was only 1 player from Skyline D last year is on Skyline, and then 3 members of old Skyline D are now Team D. So just like this happened a lot in the West region as well, where no teams actually survived the year transition, and a lot of the top players have been shuffled around to find new homes.
Yeah, we've really seen,
kind of similar to Shell's Angels, as we were talking about last week. We had 5 members in 3 different teams.
Yeah, with how much you're able to kind of move around and mix around with your groups, it's interesting to see how these groups have actually switched up and look to optimize themselves as well as possible for this tournament. Looking at the schedule right now, we will have Battle for Champion versus Skyline be our first game going on today, followed by a Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue versus a Company, Team D versus Sun Sky, then Black Mamba versus Full Send, followed by the double upper semis, and ending the day with 2 elimination rounds in that lower bracket here. So we will see 2 of the 8 teams be sent home, be eliminated, and then the other 6 will join us for tomorrow to be able to see who will take this cup here. But moving on to game 1 of this series, though, as we mentioned, Battle for Champion versus Skyline here, Sours. First versus the 8th seed, as you mentioned, about a 10-minute time difference in between their total time trials here. And we do have 1 time trial map, which is going to be that Atal'Dazar in game 3 if it gets to it.
I don't think we're going to get there, if I'm being completely honest. 10 minutes is a lot of time in a dungeon. That's the difference between, that'll take you from a 3 chest to a 2 chest, from a 2 chest to a 1 chest, etc. And then, that'll be a depletion. Hopefully we don't see any depletions, right? But we expect these guys to really kind of blast through these dungeons. The Atal'Dazar affixes are a lot less crazy than last week. Necrotic and Teaming compared to last week's explosive Raging in Atal'Dazar. What do you guys think? It's going to be a lot faster here in Atal? We saw it was like 15 minutes or something last week.
We did see some very fast Atals moving around to that 15 minutes, but how do you think Necrotic is going to match up here, Sloot, especially when considering how large of pulls they've gone on through?
Yeah, we talked a lot about Necrotic last week because it was in Waycrest, and that's just one of the most notorious dungeons for being close-knit spaces, but I really don't think it's nearly as dangerous of an affix in Atal. They just have so much space to move around. It's such an open dungeon, so, I mean, as long as the tanks will have enough peel from whatever members can help them with either a punch, stuns, slows, whatever it may be, then they should be just fine. And there's not the trash density as well. There's no kind of, larva wing or anything like that in here. So I think it'll be pretty safe.
And we have seen, I believe it's the bursting affix as well for this first dungeon here. And we've seen something with some of the snap spots coming into play here, Nagura, where we saw Method EU last week, not even really having to worry about any of those. But with how much cheese we've seen out of the Chinese region last year, do you think that's going to be likely out of either team?
I think it's going to be a bit difficult with bursting, because especially those stalkers that are jumping around, putting everyone really low, and then you get the bursting on top of that. That might be a bit of a difficulty, but we've seen teams do some crazy pulls even with those kind of affixes the last time around, so I think that's not going to stop them here.
And as we've seen previously out of the European and North American region here, the compositions coming up, the absolute mirrors, the double outlaw Windwalker combination salute that just have been dominating this tournament so far.
I'm shocked and or appalled at the comps they're using. But I mean, jokes aside, I was talking to actually you, Sours, about this. Historically, in past MDIs, you would always have the APAC or Asia regions kind of, going out on a limb, not doing the meta specs comps. But here we see them conforming.
Yep. And right now, if you'd like to vote on Twitch who you think is going to be taking this game, hashtag BFC for Battle for Champion or SY for Skyline. Be sure to do so in chat right now. Game 1 of the Eastern region starting up. Battle for Champion versus Skyline.
Atal'Dazar Nagura, or as Jack pronounces Atal'Dazar. So, I mean, we are in a fortified setting here, so pretty common for both teams to kind of head up to the left right away, as we're seeing here, and often pop their Bloodlust for a pretty meaty pull here.
Yeah, so we see, of course, both wrestlers, actually only one wrestler jump onto this ledge on the right side to pretty much prevent the Juggernauts from doing their charge. On the left side, on the other hand, we see them just all stack up, and the rest of them are just baiting the charge normally. So that means that Jack will actually have to avoid the charges when they come in.
I mean, the team must be lactose intolerant. No cheesing for them, and he runs around in circles. Now, we did notice that one of the, there was a sap on one of the casters on the side, because double caster in this affix could be actually quite rough, so making sure that none of those heals leak. A lot of damage and danger here, though, for the right side. As the Resto Druid goes down, the two rogues struggling to hang on. Windwalker goes down. Krayer about to proc his cheat death. He does. Lemon follows suit right after, and it looks like we're going to have a full team wipe here over on Skyline, so not a good start for them. Battle for Champions still kind of moseying around, making sure they're chewing up the less of the trash, but pretty slow on their part as well.
Yeah, so one thing to note here with teaming is that there's two Confessors. Now the Confessors cast a Dispel ability, which pretty much removes any sort of CC on other mobs. So what we saw them do is sap one of the Confessors, because sap is not actually a magic effect, so it cannot be dispelled by the other Confessor. So very well done by Battle for Champions to do this pull a little bit slower but safer, and not getting this dispel off and having the Devil Confessors up.
And we're seeing some of the snapping that we were talking about for Battle for Champion here on the left, as they grab all these little swords into kind of a safe spot. Snapping, for those at home, is a term referred to where you kind of jump up to a ledge where mobs can't really reach you, so they tend to teleport or snap to your location, making them easier to group up. Kind of a quasi AoE grip from a DK, if you will.
Yeah, so now they proc their first Reaping here on Battle for Champions side. They're gonna get ready to pull Rezan here, which is a bit of a different route, as we've seen from the Western teams. Usually the Western teams would do the other bosses first and then jump off with like a later Reaping pull, but now we see them with the very first Reaping pull just jumping to Rezan without Bloodlust here. Yeah,
so they keep Rezan here on the side, of course, as the first kind of iconic easy boss of the dungeon. You want to make sure that you just line of sight when he does his AoE fear, as you see Jack, the Resto Druid, kind of dip there on the side, making sure to dodge. The Warrior, of course, having that berserking, having access to being able to kind of cheat through the fear every other as he runs away desperately, making sure that the boss does not catch him.
Yeah, so we see them, of course, the melees and the healer, of course, do Jack, just trying to do as much damage as possible. One thing to note that I saw earlier as well from Jack is that he's running Tree of Life, which we've only really seen in Temple from the Western regions for those really big pulls. That probably means that the Battle for Champions is probably just going to do some very huge pulls in this dungeon, because this Tree of Life is really only good if you do those big pulls instead of doing consistent smaller pulls.
So really aggressive play here from Battle for Champion, as both teams are at the same corner right now. We have Skyline only now grabbing those Sky Terrors down, Sky Screamers, excuse me, down to Rezan, whilst the two Sky Screamers for Battle for Champion were pulled from up the stairs down. They want to make sure you cleave them down on top of the boss. Now, the important thing here is for these Sky Screamers that within one kick, so every 15 seconds or so, they will cast an AoE fear, and if you fail to interrupt them, well, then you're getting feared. So one slip up here could spell disaster for the team as they start to kite away. Rezan, of course, once again doing his fixate.
I really like the Sky Screamer pull here. It's just very efficient because Rezan really is not a very scary boss as long as you avoid the fixate and you avoid the AoE fear. So just pulling extra mobs on top of this because there's no affix to prevent them from doing so, no bolstering for example, which they don't have bolstering in any of the dungeons actually in the eastern region, so good on them.
Lucky for them, indeed. Rezan now down to 5% for Battle for Champion as they down him here. Absolute dynamite play from them. Rezan to 71% over for Skyline, so definitely still a bit behind. Once again, you know, Nigger, we're going to talk about this a million times throughout the Cups, but 6 deaths already on the board. I mean, that's a lot of time that they're going to have to chew through. Not just the raw 5 seconds per death, but also the amount of time it takes to res, run back, restart DPSing. So a lot of damage and a lot of attention needed here for this pull here for Battle for Champion with 3 Sky Screamers.
Yeah, we see Battle for Champions, of course, also playing Alliance, like we've seen from the Western region, just because of this Shadow Meld being so powerful for Reaping. But in this dungeon specifically, I don't think we've seen a lot of Reaping pulls at all because the dungeon is just so, everything is pretty close to each other. So even if you Shadow Meld one Reaping wave away, they will still probably aggro you. But still, because they can't change the faction for the next map, they just need to be Night Elves or be Alliance throughout the whole match.
Yeah, so just to mention, of course, we are actually in a teaming affix here, not bursting. So a bit of an error on our part. Poor Jack's just still waking up, unfortunately. But we do have teaming and necrotic. So for those at home, that means that there's extra trash present in the dungeon, but you also need a higher amount of trash to complete your 100% and get your Reaping breakpoints. And of course, necrotic, we've discussed before. Every successful melee that connects with whatever their target is, hopefully the tank, will get an increased stack of physical dot damage over time, which also decreases the amount of healing done and received by 2% per stack.
Yeah, we see a pretty big pull coming in from Battle for Champions here. Now, this pull doesn't look like it's very big, but there was an Honor Guard in it, and Honor Guards tend to be very scary mobs. Once you kill the totem, which prevents the Honor Guards of any damage taken, they will actually start doing a pulsing AoE on the whole raid, and they will spawn pools on the ground, which is very scary for the whole group.
Yeah, so pretty typical pull we see here. You deal with that first Honor Guard that we're seeing from Battle for Champion, and then you just get the mass stealth right over into Volkal's room. I mean, it could be second, could be third, could be first boss. It's a very open dungeon, but the second boss here for Battle for Champion, as they aggro the boss, you can see a nice view here from our observers. As you see, there are 3 totems in an equilateral triangle around the room. You have to kill these totems within 10 seconds, I believe, about 10 seconds of each other. Otherwise, they will heal to full, and you have to restart the phase. Once you do that, you get access to phase 2, Nagura.
Yeah, so one nice thing to note as well is that they triggered their Reaping right before they went to this boss. So right now they pulled the first Reaping wave to Rezan and the second Reaping wave to Volkal. Now it's very efficient to pull those Reaping waves on top of something else, because even though Reaping is scary, there's a lot of casters, but for those teams that are so practiced, they can just do it on top of bosses, do it on top of like trash pulls. So I like to see from Battle for Champions that they're so efficient with their Reaping waves here.
Yeah, I mean, very scary indeed, but the Risen Souls, as long as you get the dispels on the tank, we can see you kind of accruing that dot from the Risen Souls on their main target right now on the Warrior tank here. 5 stacks just about to fall off, so as long as those are kept in check, either through kiting, because those Risen Souls are CCable, or dispels from the healer once every 8 seconds minimum, then they should be okay. Volkal now down to 60%. It's pretty common for teams not to use their Bloodlust on this boss, which is why you still see it on cooldown for just about over 3 minutes. Volkal does passively kind of kill himself with the damage over time aura that he has, and damage the players accordingly, so not too hard of a boss here.
Yeah, sometimes the damage dealers also tend to just hold their offensive cooldowns for the next trash pull, which is going to happen after this boss on the bridge. It's a pretty significant pull that you can do afterwards, and as you said, this boss just slowly kills itself, so it's just better to hold on to those big cities. But Battle for Champions doing a really good job. Volkal is about to die, and still 0 deaths on their board.
Yeah, so they want to make sure to drag the boss away from the gate here, as they did skip some trash. They don't want to accidentally proximity aggro that trash. We get the second shroud up from the Rogue. One of the nice strengths, as we know, of course, from last week's Cup of Rogues, is this Mass Shroud. Now, pretty big pull coming up here. There are 2 Rogues of these Stalkers hidden in the pack as well, along with 2 Patrons. So this isn't actually an 8 mob pull, so a lot of damage is going to be coming in here for the tank as well.
Yeah, so those Stalkers actually have a special ability. We see the tank dropping really low on top of just having those necrotic stacks. So it's very important here that he starts to kite as we see the Ring of Peace coming out from the Windwalker. But yeah, especially those Stalkers, they do tend to put a poison debuff on the tank, which increases the nature damage taken, and those Stalkers do extra nature damage whenever they melee the tank. The problem is with those debuffs that they actually stagger, so it's difficult for the healer to dispel them both.
Yeah, a bit of a sketchy scenario here as the tank is kind of running for dear life, dipping quite low, but the problem is there is shield slams and bashes coming in from the shield bears there, and if the tank is not within proximity, they will hit the closest members. You can see the Windwalker drop down to 26% health there from eating some of those bashes to the face, but the Warrior does manage to live. They do kill the pack off. Probably, I would argue, one of the 2 hardest pulls of trash in this dungeon, save the first one, and maybe actually the one before the third boss that they're heading to, which we'll have a look at in a second, but they do get through it. Battle for Champion will be proccing their 3rd Reaping Wave here in a moment as they start to head over to the 3rd boss's room. Volcall down to 15% for Skyline, of course, Nagura, but they haven't even procced their 2nd Reaping. There's just such good coordination and timing for Battle for Champion here versus Skylines.
Yeah, definitely. Battle for Champions looking a lot more solid and clean. They have the proper route, they have 0 deaths compared to Skyline just having some struggle, especially in this very first pull. And they did use their Bloodlust in the first pull too. That means not only did they lose a couple of players on the pull, but they also lost their Bloodlust, they lost some of their cooldowns, meaning it just cost them so much time. Well, Battle for Champion just having such a solid run.
A lot of damage coming in here for Battle for Champion as the 3rd Reaping pack comes in. We see Jack has popped his Tree of Life, trying to desperately get heals out amongst all the Necrotic and the Risen Souls, Reaping packs that go on top of the tank damage. They managed to clean it up, no problem. A lot of damage coming out of the 2 rogues, one well over 100k DPS with that large pull. They do head across the middle, away from the kind of time sink worth of Dino packs, although we haven't actually seen it quite popular for that pack to get pulled in some of the teams in some of the cups, so we'll have to see how they deal with it. 64% here for Battle for Champion, as they still have a fair bit of trash to go for the 3rd boss. 41% now, just hitting their 2nd Reaping for Skyline on the right side.
Yeah, we see Battle for Champions just moving on, pulling those packs really fast, and those are the difficult packs I was talking about earlier. We just see those swords jumping to random targets and doing AoE splash damage, so it's very important, especially with such a heavy melee setup, that you try to spread out as much as possible so you don't get the damage splashed on multiple members at the same time. And of course, those Sky Screamers have a lot more HP than the swords. So if you want to be efficient, you want to try to do as much damage to the Sky Screamers, but you also don't want to risk too much, because if the swords stay alive for too long, then of course your healer is going to have trouble keeping you alive.
Battle for Champion now grabbing the last pack before they need to head up those hot stairs. There are kind of some totems on the side, some wiki totems that masks that will breathe out fire, as you can see in front of you there. That fire does a lot of damage. It will kill you in 2 hits, and running through it is quite risky, so most recommend not doing it. They do have good timing here as they finish that pack off. It does always go kind of up the stairs, the fire, and then resets back from up to down, so good timing here for them as they work their way up to the 3rd boss. Not to be forgotten, though, Skyline D just working through these sword and Sky Screamer packs as well, but they're a fair bit behind with 7 deaths on the board right now.
Yeah, so it's probably going to be a big pull coming in from Battle for Champions here, as they do have their Bloodlust ready. Actually, we see they're doing a little bit of a smaller pull first. Maybe they're waiting for some cooldowns to be ready, or just pulling the whole room might just be too big, especially on teaming. Yeah. So maybe they just want to get rid of those through first.
Well, what they're doing is, we were actually commonly doing this with some keys last night, Nagura. I'm sad you forgot. But in here, they're trying to proc their 4th Reaping Wave, and they're going to I would assume, one huge pull here of Reaping plus that massive trash pack right in front of the boss. We'll have to see. So they wanted to get rid of the small mobs on the side. One of them did have an Augur, which is a caster, a bit of a pain in the butt to take care of. So we do see the big pull coming in here right in front of the boss. The boss does not get pulled, though. All of the Reaping is coming in on the sides. A lot of casters on the side, though, so going to be a bit difficult as Bloodlust is popped over for Battle for Champion. Huge amounts of damage coming in, but also getting output from these rogues and the Prot Warrior. Starting to kite a bit now because of the Necrotic, though, so they're going to have to pay attention to the casters in the back, make sure none of them hit the members.
And just so much damage coming out of Battle for Champions here. We see the mobs dying, we see the rogues just doing so much damage. We see cheat death actually from one of the rogues, of course. You know, they have this one ability just makes them immune to die for you know, I think it's a 6 minutes cooldown, right? So every 6 minutes they can die, and then they don't actually die. So, you know, rogues.
Sounds fair to me. As the 3rd boss, Priestess Alunza is finally aggroed. Now, this boss particularly simple. She will spawn masks periodically, as we see one spawn in the back there, which will tend to gravitate towards these blood pools on the ground. The players do need to soak up these blood pools once the boss reaches 100 energy, else she will kind of drain the life out of them. But should they be poisoned with these pools, you'll actually do damage of a maximum of 5% per second to her, for a total, if I'm not mistaken, of 30% to the boss's health. So here's the transfusion right now. Everybody has collected their blood debuffs. We can see a red stream instead of a golden holy one doing a ton of damage to her. So as long as they keep the masks either CC'd or DPS'd, of course we have 2 rogues so they can blind. We also have a paralyzed coming out of the Windwalker. They should be just fine.
Yeah, so it's really important how many transfusions you need to kill this boss, pretty much. So depending on how much damage you do to the boss, it might die in 2 transfusions or in 3. Now we've seen in the Western Cup, we've seen some teams do 2, some teams do 3, but I think they're in a pretty good run to actually do it with 2, and their time is really fast. They are now 13 minutes in, and they're on their way to the last boss. They only need 2% trash, so they're having a really good time here.
It was actually 25%, so I misspoke. But Princess Alunza does go down. And you're right, Nigro. I mean, 13:45 on the clock. They have 2% left, which they're likely going to save for after they kill the last boss here to make sure that they just don't have to deal with that 5th Reaping Wave. A bit of unlucky timing here on the fire, but they're patient nonetheless as they run up, and will run up to the left here to access the final boss in this kind of square symmetrical dungeon in Atal'Dazar right now. There's a bit of RP here as they have to wait for the stairs to kind of branch out. You see one of the rogues run ahead. The Sky Screamer does get pulled, not sure if intentional or not. It does actually get its fear off, so I don't think this was intentional. Now, you have to be careful. If you jump when you run by the perch that they're sitting on, you will actually proximity aggro them, so I think that's might have what happened there.
Maybe they also just pulled it on purpose. They probably should have interrupted it, though, because they can just see throughout this fight and then just pull it into the boss at the very end to pretty much avoid the reaping. So that's sometimes what people would do, just hibernate it or put any other CC on it. Now, it's a little bit scary if you do that, because if it's CC'd somewhere in the room, as we can see there by the gate, if you pull the boss close and one of the damage abilities just goes jumps over to the Sky Screamer and the CC gets broken, and if you don't notice early enough, then one fear might go through, and that could cause a disaster, that could cause a wipe. So it's a bit risky to do this strat, but it just saves you a lot of time because you don't have to backtrack afterwards, right?
Especially with all the spiders on the ground from Yasma. Of course, if you run into these purple spiders, they will do a ton of shadow damage to you and spawn a pool on the ground. Now, they will spawn periodically throughout the remainder of the fight, and they kind of fixate players once in a while, running for random players. You can see when they're kind of bolstered like that and they have a big purple aura around them, you want to make sure you run away from them. But the main mechanic, really the one that you want to watch out for, that they executed at least so far quite well, we're seeing here again, is that every player except for the tank will have an image spawn out of them when the boss reaches 100 energy. The images try to kind of work their way to the boss. If they make it there, they will explode for a ton of damage and add a pretty hefty dot to the entire party.
Yeah, so their strategy right now seems a little bit inefficient, because we saw Jack actually not standing with the group and spawning the spiders pretty far away from the group. Now, usually if you want to be as efficient as possible, you need to try to spawn the spiders as close to each other as possible. So once they chase the players, they just all move together and don't cover the whole room. But we see Jack just kind of running around a little bit. I assume because, as we just saw, he needed to re-hibernate the ad in the back, so maybe that's why he was standing there. But yeah, we see the spiders a little bit more spread out than we've seen from some other strats.
They do have the availability as well for with cloaks from the rogues. Of course, it is shadow damage, so you can have a rogue use cloak kind of offensively here to clear the area of spiders and make sure they don't chase you and just spawn a bunch of pools. 15% on Yasma as that final Sky Screamer is pulled here for Battle for Champion. They are looking to kind of finish off the Sky Screamer, skip the 5th Reaping Wave, and kill Yasma all at the same time. I mean, really solid performance from them starting off the series here. Not too unexpected with their initial victory here, but 1-0 for Battle for Champions.
Very strong performance here out of Battle for Champion here, taking game 1 against Skyline here. And time overall, Sours was pretty solid on that, about 16.5.
Yeah,
16 and change.
It's a very respectable time. Of course, like the NA or the West teams were doing this even faster with Explosive, which is pretty remarkable. But Battle for Champion, that was a perfectly clean run, 0 deaths. That's the kind of play that we expect to see out of these top Chinese teams.
Yeah, and we even saw just, how much work the rest of Druid is. I was able to run up very quickly off the desk to be able to rejoin you guys after that dungeon, so don't worry too much about that. But Sours, taking a look at some of these highlights of the run, though, that wipe early on for Skyline just completely sank them off the pole.
Yeah, it was just really brutal. Like Skyline just kind of fell flat, and then Battle for Champion just continued to plow through boss after boss. They had really perfect rehearsed movement throughout the entire dungeon, and they just cleaned up all the bosses with significant lead, and they just maintained that lead throughout the entire time. and they just crushed it. They didn't do anything wrong. They could have gone faster. It was kind of slow, but they played perfectly, so you can't hate them for it.
I mean, part of the time sink that you were talking about with Explosive last week for West, Necrotic on the flip side is a bit of a time sink too. Prot Warriors are essentially DPS in terms of the amount that they bring in, especially in those big AoE packs. So having the Prot Warrior needing to kite around constantly and, the DPS chasing him and everything does tank your DPS a bit too, but it's still a really good performance from them so far.
Well, I noticed when we were talking about that as the trash pack after Volcall, you had specifically mentioned how, the tank was kind of on the ropes there. They had 2 or 3 moments that they kind of had to kite there. What was it that made it so the tank was going to be able to get away without endangering the lives of the DPS there? Slid for you.
Okay. Yeah. Girl just gave me this piercing look. I was like, oh my god. It was really similar. Nagura was the one casting it at that exact moment when it happened, but it just sticks out to me. It's the same time we were commenting in Waycrest Manor when we first saw Waycrest Manor from Method EU versus Fallen Ones, if I'm not mistaken, last week, where Shella ran the Frost Mage and we were saying it was important for the peel for Necrotic from them. And here they just played everything perfectly. Once the Warrior needed to kite, they got the stun off with the Shockwave, interrupted some of the shield doors as well, started to kite. Ring of Peace comes down from the Windwalker Monk right away, buys enough time in that small space for the Warrior to get away, reset stacks, and they go at it again.
Yeah, let's talk about this tank a little bit from Battle for Champion. A lot of people remember Chinese very fondly for one specific play where Team MPE had a full team wipe to Rockmora, and then a Death Knight sold it from 70 to 0. That Death Knight is back. He is the tank for Battle for Champion. So, he's here for redemption.
Yeah, and really was able to see that on display here, as it looks like this team has just been practicing so well and been so powerful for this dungeon so far. Game 2 is going to be moving on to the Temple of Sethraliss, though, with Bursting, Quaking, and I believe we are going to be able to have Fortified as well following up with it. So don't go anywhere, guys. We will return with Game 2 right after this short break. Battle for Champion has taken an early lead against their opponents in Skyline with an absolutely crushing victory in Atal'Dazar here. We're about to be going into Game 2 on Temple of Sethraliss here. My name's Jack, and joining me on the desk here is Sloot, Nagura, and Sours, guys. So Game 2 coming up here, Sours. You were predicting that this is going to be a quick 2-0. Now we're moving on to Fortified, Bursting, and Quaking on Sethraliss here. What are we looking at this? No comp changes, just straight up strong play?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect to see anything terribly different here. Sethraliss is a dungeon that's not really terribly affected by bursting. There's not really any pulls in this dungeon where you can pull so many mobs that you're going to ever wipe to bursting, so it should just be a blast out of these guys.
Yeah, I'm bursting with excitement on this one. Salute here as we're going into some of these polls. We saw a lot of times where some of the other groups were pulling some of the early packs in the western region right at the start of the instance, going into some of those Berserker packs. We're looking to see some of those be featured again.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked to. I think a lot of these teams are playing around that Reaping Affix, and we saw them pop that first Reaping in the West a lot and kind of combine it either with the boss or with a larger trash pull before. But I'm going to actually counter what you said, Sours. I think bursting can be dangerous if they end up doing those really big pulls in the second boss room and the third boss room, and we already know those are quite taxing.
Yeah, especially taxing on the healers. Now, last time that we saw Temple of Sethraliss, Nagura, we were seeing it on Grievous, so it was Fortified Grievous that they had to deal with here. So now we're moving on to Bursting. The rest of Druid gameplay we've seen a couple times previously here, and I think those big pressure points, as we've seen previously, won't really be on Galvats, but it'll be on those kind of larger trash pulls that mentioned that second and third boss. But we're going to dive right into this one, going into Game 2 here between Battle for Champion and Skyline here.
Yeah, so I do believe Grievous is a bit more difficult to deal with here, especially in the Dervish packs. But now with Bursting, as you mentioned before, and just these big pulls that we saw in the Western region, they might not be able to do, or it's like a lot scarier for them to do.
I think the Dervish pack will be a bit easier actually with Bursting, but not the second, the second boss's room with that big pull. Nonetheless, we do see right away the Bloodlust coming out of Battle for Champion here on the left as they go down into a rather meaty pull here, making sure to line of sight down the stairs with all those marksmen at the top. Of course, they are physical kind of ranged mobs. Very hard to get in unless you have that grip coming out of them, but Bloodlust on both sides, Nagura.
Yeah, that's actually a crazy pull coming out of Battle for Champs here. We see Skyline do a little bit of a smaller pull. They did pull one of the bigger packs back up to their first one, but Battle for Champions just pretty much taking everything on their way, just going in and just bloodlusting, and we see just the damage coming out of the rogues, of course, just destroying this pack here.
Yeah, not far behind, though, that Prot Warrior. And, the Windwalker acting as that physical battery, not to be forgotten with that 5% physical debuff on the mobs. We do see Bloodlust finally ending for both sides, cleaning up the trash nicely. No deaths on either end, but the pack that Battle for Champion is still just now finishing up with that bursting, making sure everyone's healthy from Jack. We're only seeing Skyline start now, so both teams, as you said, Nigura, pop their Bloodlust, but a much more modest pull coming out of Skyline as we see the first Reaping taken right into the boss here for Battle for Champion.
Okay, so they're pulling this last trash pack that they have to kill before the boss. Now there's also some stealth mobs around here that they want to pull before engaging the boss. It is fortified, so I assume they're not going to engage the boss here on top of Reaping plus one whole trash pack. But this is already a very scary pull, especially on top of bursting. And as we can see, all those pulls just spawning from the Reaping mobs. But bursting is just one of those affixes. If you control it very well, if your damage dealers can hold off DPS, can actually pay attention to the debuff and the duration of it, then it's not such a big deal.
But we do know how DPS brain acts these days. Now, I like to see, we had the power shot, for instance, coming out of the marksman there for Battle for Champion. A lot of good crowd control coming up to make sure that it was avoided entirely. You can sidestep it because it does snapshot its direction, but nonetheless, Atal'Dazar and Aspix, the first boss duo here aggroed for Battle for Champion, as they make sure to separate them right away, as Aspix does start with that lightning shield on them, and any direct damage done to that will actually reflect a substantial amount of damage back at you. Now, in this kind of fortified setting where the bosses aren't as tough, it's not too bad, but you could have a bad combination of the static shot plus quaking plus a lightning shield hitting you, and down you go. The tank getting quite low here as they manage to hold on, though, healing him back above that 20% mark. We did see a cheat death proc as well, Nagura.
Yeah, so Atal'Dazar does do the Cyclone Strike. Now, you can actually reflect the Cyclone Strike as a warrior, but it is very scary because if you don't use it in the right moment and if you get hit by too many of them at the same time, you're just going to get one shot, even if you're a very tanky Prot Warrior. So we saw the tank drop very, very low, but he managed to survive. And of course, the cheat death, as you said, proc by one of the rogues. But it's a rogue, so he's going to be fine for now.
You and your rogues. So following suit, of course, once Aspix reaches that 100 energy, we see all the Static Shack. Conversely there, once Atal'Dazar reaches 100 energy after maintaining the lightning shield, he will have that kind of arrow charge where he will snapshot players' locations, adding arrows to their locations with a pulsing AoE, prompting players that they should get the heck out of the way, otherwise they will get hit for an immense amount of damage. Atal'Dazar does fall, Aspix remains here. They're waiting for that lightning shield to fall off patiently here, don't want to reflect any of that damage. Lightning shield finally fades and they go right back in. Skyline kind of holding their own, not falling far behind. Same amount of trash on the board for them, Nagura, but I mean, once again, the pull was just so modest at the start versus Battle.
Yeah, Battle for Champion definitely doing a lot bigger trash pulls here. They are not too far behind on the boss fight, but we see Aspix going down already for Battle for Champions, while Skyline on the other side just, still has both bosses to chew through here. So definitely an advantage here for Battle for Champion.
So this dungeon is pretty linear. We talked about it a lot in the West Cup last week, but your options and what you skip in the dungeon are largely opened up by having these rogues with shrouds. So we can see this kind of gauntlet bridge where the arrows rain down here as the Windwalker unfortunately does get smacked in the face by one of them. We see the one of the shrouds come up right away. They dodge that Crawlisk Rider, which is a pretty hefty mob that you want to deal with, that you don't want to deal with. Making sure to spread out for quaking here. You don't want to get clipped by somebody else's quaking, else it will take you out of that stealth. So they finally shroud through everything, pick up one of these packs just before the second boss's room here. Yeah,
I want to note one thing about their strategies coming in here. So Battle for Champion did have pretty different strategies when it comes to the Western region, and they were able to watch the Western region compete in these dungeons and look at their timers, look at their strategies. So it's interesting that Battle for Champion just, they're doing their own thing. They are really fast in those dungeons, but they're saying, you know what, we're playing our own strategy. We're not copying anything from the Western region. We figured this strategy out ourselves, and we're doing really well.
Except for those double rogues. But, that's pretty standard across the globe right now. Noxious Breath being to be dodged here by the Prot Warrior. It does snapshot a location. Should you get hit by it, does a ton of nature damage and adds an 8-second dot to you. So you want to make sure you move out of the way for that. Now, these Crawlisk Riders, of course, once they reach 50% HP, they will dismount from that awful, disgusting-looking bug and start to cast Lightning Shield and a Frontal Cleave, dealing a pretty high amount of damage to, anybody caught in front, but especially the tank. So that's why they're only kind of doing 2 here. It looks like a modest pull, but it's actually a lot of damage intake on the tank.
Yeah, so we're not seeing a crazy pull where they just go in and pull the whole room. Of course, they didn't save their Bloodlust, which the teams who did do this crazy pull where they pulled the whole room did save their Bloodlust from the start to just use it on this pack. So we see Battle for Champions just doing some smaller pulls here without their Bloodlust available. It's just too much to deal with, especially with all those interrupts that you need on those tenders.
Important to note, of course, for those at home, we have discussed bursting, but Quaking here once again shows face for this competition in the East Cup. Quaking, as you can see right now on the screen for Battle for Champion, more of a nuisance really. Every 20 seconds players will pulse after about a 4-second cast and AoE damage for 20% of your max HP. But let's put that on hold for a sec. Actually, pretty substantial pull coming here from Battle for Champion. They leave a couple of the incubators on the side, so it's not really a full room pull, but a lot of damage coming in here. You want to make sure you dispel some of those poisons that go out on random players. Now, once again, as you mentioned on the first boss as well, Nagura, a well-timed spell reflect from the Prot Warrior could actually do a fair bit of damage for those as well.
Yeah, we see Jack still playing this tree form, Tree of Life, just for those really big pulls as we see them pull the Reaping on top of this middle pack here. Now, they will have some incubators left, as you said, so they pretty much pulled this whole room in 3 pulls instead of just doing it in 1 and just pulling everything. But they're still very fast, still have 0 deaths, just solid run from them, as you see Jack just healing away these bursting stacks.
I mean, solid as well. Skyline on the right side, of course, on the small screen right now. They're doing this kind of the same strat here, but everything is just a bit more modest, where it takes 3 pulls for battle. You see 4 pulls likely coming out of Skyline, 2 pulls at the start of the dungeon instead of 1 for battle. So it's just starting to make them fall a bit more behind. Merektha nonetheless spawns here, the second boss for Battle for Champion, as they rear up to start aggroing her. Now, they're all kind of sitting in the corner there. It looks like they did pull that Nimbus, which we saw the other teams in the West do as well, just to add a bit of trash percentage, because this boss really, Nagura, is not very dangerous.
Yeah, so this boss, actually they did one mistake here, as the boss actually just a frontal breath. He will target one of the players, and what you want to do is you want to pull the boss to the side and make sure that all the players stand to the outside of the room, so the breath actually doesn't cover too much of the middle, because it will leave behind those pulls, as we can see, which are slowing and damaging. So we saw the breath hit a little bit of the middle of the room, but there's still enough space left for them for this intermission phase here.
Now, this Nimbus in a fortified setting, folks, for those at home, is actually quite dangerous. It melees pretty hard on the tank, but really this release charge cast that you're about to see that hits the group for about 30% of their HP is what's dangerous. Now, they do have a accumulate charge cast that needs to be interrupted, else they will gain a buff for 100% increased damage, including that release charge. So that, in combination with, you know, a poorly timed Quaking, unlucky Quaking, any kind of residual damage like poisons from those snakes, could spell disaster. Nonetheless, they're handling it quite well so far.
Yeah, so in this phase 2 that we can see here, there's no frontal breath, no cone, so the players can stand wherever they want. But there's one extra ability, is the Blinding Sands, which is pretty much a flashbang ability. You need to turn around your character. If you look straight at the snake, then you will actually get disoriented, which obviously you don't want.
No, you don't. Especially because if the tank gets disoriented, they will drop momentary aggro for the duration, and somebody else will get smacked in the face. Merektha now entering the second transition at usually 40%, but it seemed she got impatient and went down early. So she will be circling around the room, as we can see here. Then she will occasionally cut across the room. Any players caught in that kind of ground aggro will get punted and take a significant amount of damage. Merektha pops back up 33% as they chew through the remainder of her third phase.
Yeah, so those ads that spawn in the intermission phase are actually kind of annoying to deal with, because once in a while they will drop those zones on the ground, kind of like a whirlwind zone, a sandstone, that will make you miss all of your abilities. So you're not going to be able to damage them until you drag them out of it, out of this cloud. Now, that's why you see like stun rotations, typhoons, and stuff like that coming in from those teams to interrupt this ability. And the last phase of the boss is actually the most dangerous one, because those ads are actually going to come in at the very end. But Battle for Champion had so much damage that those ads that those ads actually didn't spawn.
Oh, I'm so excited to see something that happened there. All the players go through this first Mario Lightning Gauntlet quite well here. They dip to the side now. Curious to see here, Nagura, if they will pull all 6 dervishes.
They are.
Looks like they are.
No,
okay, only 3. So, keynote about these dervishes is that they don't really melee, rather, and they barely move unless you're out of range. But the way they move is they occasionally blink with some AoE splash damage. As you can see that blue swirly there on top of their current target, likely in this case the tank, the warrior, the Prot Warrior. A lot of damage that comes onto the group here, but they took it a bit modest. splitting them 3 and 3. There are 6 dervishes, and you need to kill all 6 in order to spawn Galvast to the 3rd boss of the dungeon. A lot of damage coming in there from that release charge from the Nimbus. 1% on the Windwalker. Prot Warrior struggling a bit at 11% now. Bursting goes off as well, starting to kite just a bit, making sure he doesn't get clipped by anything else. But a lot of struggle here for the Resto Druid as he managed to top everyone off. Was that a last second Tree of Life?
I think it just went back on, like it just came off cooldown, and they do have their Bloodlust ready as well. The problem was when they pulled those dervishes, they actually didn't have the Bloodlust ready yet. It was only a 15-second cooldown, I believe. So, and I believe Jack also had cooldown on his Tree of Life, which is a 3-minute cooldown. So everyone just got a little bit scary. Everyone dropped low, but we saw Jack just spamming that button in the Tree of Life, and as soon as it came off cooldown, he pressed the button, got everyone, managed to heal everyone back up, and now we see the reaping with those last dervishes.
Yeah, a bit of a scary moment there for them. No casualties though. Skyline at 40% on Merektha on the right side there, just doing their second transition, dealing with those sand-encrusted snakes, making sure that they move them out of those line of sight zones so that they can DPS them effectively. Using a bit of time efficiently here, Battle for Champion on the left as they deal with one of those small mobs as they wait for Galvast to spawn. They actually marked it with an X and are pulling it on top.
Oh, wow.
Wanting to make sure you interrupt it. Now, Galvast, we are in a fortified setting, but this boss is very notorious for scaring everybody in this dungeon.
Definitely. So this boss does a scary amount of AoE, and it also spawns those totems on the side, as we can see on the right, Jack soaking one of them. Now, if you soak this beam, then it does a lot of damage to you, and it applies a stacking debuff. So you have to make sure that you rotate the players that are soaking it to not have too many stacks on one of them. And we just now see this Stormcaller dying and applying this bursting plus quaking on the whole group, so that was a very scary moment for them. But this time around we don't have Grievous, so it should be a little bit easier for those teams to handle this boss.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a desynchronized spawn to these pillars that Naguro was talking about. Oftentimes you can get away with only a 3-man rotation in your party. Sometimes you do need 4 though, as the first person stacks of 9 just barely don't fall off before the next one would pulse. So, but the rogues do have a lot of tricks up their sleeve, of course, in the form of Cloak of Shadows, Cheat Death as an absolute emergency if needed to double eat one if that is the case. Now, if the boss reaches 100 energy, they're dead. And it reaches energy very, very quickly, so you want to make sure you intercept those. Absolute key in the fight. Skyline has finally downed Merektha, the second boss, and are heading over to their Dervish pull as well. We see the same stealth coming out of them as they go past the Mario Gauntlet there on their own, making sure to move safely between those spaces. 22% here for Galvast, though, for battle.
Yeah, so there's one interesting strategy that comes in from Resto sometimes. Now, I haven't seen it yet in any of the cups from those teams. It usually will only happen when there's Tyrannical or when there's higher levels, but sometimes Resto will actually run Balanced Affinity, and they will run special traits that will actually give you Leech whenever you Star Search. So you will see them go into Moonkin form, use their Star Search, get a bunch of Leech, and just try to soak as many pillars as possible. They get a lot of stacks and just heal themselves up with the Leech. But since there's a 45 setting and Feral Affinity just gives them more damage overall, they choose to not do that strat here.
I could listen to you talk about Balanced Druids all day. I love it.
Resto Druid, okay?
Yeah, you do both a lot actually in Keith's turn. The final Lightning Bridge, which you saw claim, if I'm not mistaken, 2 lives overall in the West Cup last week. We'll see if there is a first victim here in the East Cup at all as they start to safely move past the bridge. Now, you are slowed during this, and these kind of walls and balls of lightning, should they hit you, will actually do a huge amount of damage to you and put you back at the start of the bridge. But no problem for them. It looks like they tried to stealth past everything, but they mistimed their shroud there, so they do have to deal with the Spark Channel and Nagur that I know you mentioned every week is a huge amount of time lost.
Yeah, so this Spark Channel just has so much HP, and they can't really pull anything on top of this because all this trash that you can see here does not give any percentage towards your enemy forces counter. So it's just pretty much a huge time thing, just everyone having to single target here. And we see on the other side, on Skyline side, we actually see a death coming in.
Yeah, so they have 4 deaths on the board right now, struggling a lot with this Dervish pull. I think, I didn't actually say if they pulled all the Dervishes. We were kind of chatting here about battle, but nonetheless, a quite dangerous pull. They're also dealing with the third Reaping Wave on top of that. A lot of damage coming in. Lemon does go down, releases, and is running over to the pack, as we know that you do have the checkpoint at Merektha's room right now, the second boss, which they've downed. Let's talk about Battle for Champion here, though. The key to what they're doing with this gauntlet is the tank will run around pulling all these conscripts, making sure that they don't melee any of the DPS and healers, who will run around and grab the 2 eyes on either side of this area. You have to socket the eyes in the mouth statue at the end, and if you do that, not only do you gain trash percent, but it gives you escape from this area. So the trick here is that they're going to spawn their 4th Reaping, the mouth is now open, the team's going to run through all the way down, and then they're going to mass Night Elf Shadow Meld at the final boss's room, past the trash here, and just avoid the 4th Reaping Wave and all the trash that they accumulated there.
Yeah, it's also important that those eyes get put in at the very same time, because as you might have noticed, they had 78% trash once they got to this point. So if you put one eye in earlier, then you will already trigger a Reaping. So it's important that you wait for both of the eyes to be close to the head and then put them in at the very same time.
Aye, Captain. Rogue dipping quite low to the 2% mark there, just manages to heal up. These Hexers are really dangerous, and one of the Orb Guardians that we do see occasionally actually tends to leak from that Gauntlet area as it comes over right now. A lot of damage coming in on the group. The Lava Bursts and Flame Shocks from these Hexers guarding the 4th boss's room do a lot of random damage to the pack. It's not all on the tank. One of the Rogues does proc that Cheat Death. Pro struggling. We see Tree of Life coming over here from Jack as the other Rogue dips quite low, sub 20%. Bursting Stacks are doing a ton of damage to the group, managing to heal everyone up as they deal with the last Orb Guardian that just kind of leaked from that area. Nice leap there from the Warrior to get away. They didn't even pull all the Hexers here either.
Yeah, that was a scary moment for them as we see just the bursting and the quaking coming in. At the same time, the ward's dropping so low, but he managed to survive with a sliver of HP. They did unfortunately pull one of those Guardians that are neutral, so you can't aggro them by just body pulling. They somehow attack them or accidentally pulled them somehow, so it's very scary. They have to deal with it because they don't have their Shadow Meld ready, right? They skipped the Reaping earlier with it, so there's no way of them to get rid of it, and they just need to kill it, which costs them a little bit of time, but they're still pretty far ahead, so they should be fine.
Yeah, so I mean, unlucky for them. There are those Hard Guardians. The reason the tank was frantically kiting at a stacking debuff to you for damage taken at 20% per stack, the Hard Strike. So, you know, that in combination with the rest of the trash caused quite a wallop on the Prot Warrior. But yeah, Nagura pointed out to me as well right now, they're at 99% trash on the board. Typically what we saw from West teams in terms of efficiency was that they would actually go back and pull the trash that we saw them pull right now with the buff from the last phase of the boss. So I'm fully expecting it was a mistake that they pulled the Hexer plus that combo there. Somebody might have gotten out of stealth early, didn't drop their Shadow Meld properly. Ton of things could have happened. Unfortunately, they're not going to have to deal with the Reaping on top of the bosses that reached 100 energy, 100 trash count. So a bit of time lost here and a bit, you know, kind of the first major slip-up, I would say, that we've seen from this Battle for Champion team.
Definitely it is. So they seem really solid so far, and I definitely believe, as you said, this has to be a mistake because it's just so efficient to pull this last trash percentage on top of the boss while having this buff from the last phase. So I do believe it was a mistake, and just them triggering the Reaping. Now they did pull the boss, which they could have waited, right? They could have just finished off the Reaping, waited until everyone's out of combat, let Jack just regen his mana, but maybe they didn't really know how far ahead they were and just figured, you know, we have to go, guys. We need to pull this boss right now. So one more thing to note actually is that Jack had to use his Tree of Life for this miss pull that it did. So now he's not going to have the Tree of Life to heal up the boss, which is very important because you don't really have a cooldown to heal him up that fast without this Tree of Life.
Right, you are, Nagura. Now, on this boss, it's a bit flip side from what you're used to seeing. You do have to kill waves of trash, 4 Hexers specifically, along with 1 Guardian that spawns. Once you do that, you have access to the Avatar of Sethraliss, which is menacingly floating in the middle of the room here. It starts at 0% HP. You have to heal it from 0 to 70% in one go. And once you do that, it will trigger a second round of trash. You deal with that, heal her up to 100%. She comes down and buffs you with 50% damage done, haste, and healing done as well. Sorry, no, 50% haste, healing done, and 90% reduced damage taken, which is the buff we were talking about that most teams use to kind of backtrack and kill trash with. So a lot of inefficiency coming out of them here. Not too far behind Skyline, actually. They didn't mess up their gauntlet at all. They did manage to skip that channeler as well, but I think it's a little too late.
Most likely. Now, we did see Jack actually have his Tree of Life back up, so good on them that he had his tree, managed to heal up the boss to 70%. Now, they're in the second mission phase here. Usually, you would want to use your Bloodlust here. Now, Battle for Champion does not have the Bloodlust ready, because this is kind of, this, I believe, is the scariest phase out of all of the phases here, as you have all those toads coming in, just having those Plague Doctors, and we see some a lot of deaths coming in for Skyline here.
Yeah, their skip was quite deadly. Their skip didn't fully work out there. Now, they did manage, I believe, to kind of save it. I'm not sure if the Resto Druid released to run back or they had... Oh, of course, they don't have Engineering Rest. So no save there. That cute little gravestone there for Incarare as he kind of waits. We do see the final Hexer here for Battle for Champion down to 50% now as they will enter the second transition phase worth of healing. And the problem is they already used...
they skipped the Reaping, right?
Yeah,
so.
yeah, they skipped the Reaping and they already used one of their Shrouds to get past this Chandler. So that's probably all she wrote, unfortunately, for Skyline for this game, as Avatar is now at 90% for Battle for Champion. Once they hit that 100%, I mean, it's going to take a Christmas miracle for them to get killed through that 90% damage taken reduction.
Definitely. And I'm not really sure what their strategy is here, because the Resto Druid is just running through, pulling everything. I believe he wants to just go through and Shadow Melt. If he actually managed to survive that, then that's a really good idea, as he's just struggling to keep himself alive. He's really fast, though, as some of the cats... Oh, no, almost made it.
You hate to see it.
Oh, no.
Bloodlust has been popped here for Battle for Champion as they're dealing with the last wave of 4 Hexers. Avatar's already been healed up, so as soon as these Hexers die, and of course they don't have any trash to cleave on top of it as they accidentally pulled it, reached 100%, that will pretty much spell it as Battle for Champion takes the series, Series 1 of the day with a 2-0 sweep, Mr. Jack.
And Battle for Champion has been playing it like it so far. They're sealing the match 1 here over Skyline. And with Sours, as we mentioned before, with such a dominant lead over them in the time trials, such clean play in the first 2 dungeons there, it really starts showing why they are that #1 seed.
Yeah, these 2 teams were really a whole worlds apart. But like the skill of Battle for Champion, their movement was so much more clean. Like even just looking at how they were dealing with the dodging the lightning balls and the various gauntlets, they just flew through there. Like there was no issue at all. But when Skyline was running through there, they were like hesitating, they were like running a little bit, they were stopping, and then they were dodging left or right. And it was, you know, those little differences, like they add up a little bit, but it was just really clean play out of Battle for Champion the entire dungeon. They had like almost a full boss lead the second they killed the second boss. And then it was crazy. They were just flying further and further ahead. You know, they weren't as fast, right, as West, but there was this one huge mistake that you did see out of Skyline where the healer gets blinded, he's struggling around, and then he just doesn't get out of that goop quite fast enough, and then that was almost a disaster where Skyline almost wiped on the second boss. Luckily, they were able to pull that one through.
Yeah, and just those little simple mistakes we've seen so many times previously, just be able to obliterate your whole group, and when you only have that one battle res here. But I think one of the most notable parts of that dungeon run really was the mistake on the side of Battle for Champion, where they ended up pulling, after the failed Shadow Meld there, Slew, where they had to actually end up pulling out that extra trash, had to deal with Reaping a lot earlier than they wanted to there.